Hello, everybody. Simon Goncharenko again with Safeguard Solutions, and welcome to another episode with a very, as I just coined it, I guess, a multifaceted individual that I have with me today, Jonathan Evans, who is the director at Total Data Center Solutions, which is an end-to-end consultancy, in the co-location market. And Jonathan and I just started talking a little bit, and I thought we'd include you into this conversation. And Jonathan, you just started answering. What I want to just go ahead and let our audience in on this is just how you got into the industry.
Yeah, well, I left college and I wanted to become a boat designer. So I did that for a couple of years, but the boat designing business and the boat industry is very volatile. And so I was struggling to make a living from it. And then by accident, I went into a company that designed and built what they were then called was computer rooms in the early 80s. Computer rooms were built for each individual company. Any big company had a big mainframe computer, and the big mainframe computer sat in a computer room which was purpose-built for that particular company. Things like the IBM 3090s, digital equipment, ICL equipment, all bespoke computer rooms, not data centers. So I worked with that company for about 10 years, doing designs, doing sales, doing projects. And that's all they specialized in was computer rooms. They sold out then to a bigger company and I left them. And I started my own company called Mainframe Installation Services. Mainframe Installation Services, as the name suggests, we designed and built computer rooms for mainframe computers. So I did that for a few years, and then we had the dot-com bubble, and I had a couple of bad debts, and so that stopped. And then, do you want me to carry on with this, or should?
Sure, absolutely. No, this is very, very interesting.
So then in about 2002, I went and worked with a very good friend of mine, Noel Meany, who had a company that he bought out of receivership in the dot-com bubble, which had a company that half-built data center in Dublin and a fiber infrastructure across the whole of Europe, which they'd installed at a very high price. So he bought all that. And then I helped him turn his data center into a co-location facility. And this was when the co-location facilities were just starting off, really. There had been a couple built in Docklands in London for Global Switch. A guy called Andy Ruin built them, and then people began to realize that co-location was probably the way forward. And so we built this, we fitted out the co-location data center in Dublin, and he got clients to come in there, and he made a success of it. Then it was called Citadel 100. And after that, then I set up Total Data Center Solutions in about 2002, I think it was. And the idea was to go to potential clients who wanted to get into data center business, property companies and that type of thing. And because they could see it was a very lucrative business even then, property companies were quite anxious to get into data centers. So I teamed up with an architect friend of mine who specialized in data center design, a guy called Dave Bloxham. And he designed all the data centers for Global Switch, so he knew all about data center design. I teamed up with him and a few M&E consultants, and we would basically design computer rooms, data centers from a greenfield site for people who were interested in getting into the business. The problem was that a lot of these people didn't realize how expensive it was to get into the business, and many times we would get so far down the track and then they'd realize they couldn't raise the funding or they didn't have the funding. And so they would have to stop, and then often we wouldn't get paid. So it was quite a speculative business to be in that respect. But we had some great experiences. And then I met a guy called Franek Serjewinski, and he wanted to get into building co-location data centers. And he set up a company called Centrum, and this is going back to about 2007, I guess. But again, he struggled to get the funding because he had the clients, he had the building, which was an old Nokia factory in Camberley. but he couldn't square the circle of getting this funding before somebody would sign a contract, and they wouldn't sign a contract till he owned the building. And that went on for about a year. And then eventually he got the funding he needed from Andy Rowan, and off the company went, and Centrum built about 5 or 6 big co-location data centers all around the M25 to take the banks that were moving out of the city, because the city was considered too vulnerable a place for the banks to have their data centers. So that I worked with him for a few years, and then I worked in different roles, and in the end I was like a global sales executive or something, trying to sell space for him in his data centers. And from that I met a guy from Norway, and he wanted to build a data center in a side of a fjord in a NATO bunker that had been abandoned by NATO because they didn't see a threat from Russia anymore, foolishly. So, excuse your Russian background, but
hey, that's very interesting, and I think very appropriate.
They thought there wasn't going to be a threat, so they decommissioned this big cave in the ground, in the side of a cliff.
Wishful thinking, right?
in Stavanger in Norway, and they wanted to turn it into a data center, and it was a really interesting project. And so I joined them. There were only 3 of us, and I took on the role there of sales and marketing because no one else was doing it. There was only 3 of us, and I really enjoyed promoting Norway as a data center destination because they didn't have any data centers at the time. This is going back about 8 years, I guess. So I worked with those guys as they fitted out the data center, the cave, and turned it into a data center called Green Mountain Data Centers. And they had very interesting cooling solution using the fjord to cool it. They had very interesting fire protection system, reducing the oxygen level so that the fire couldn't start. So all in all, it was a very interesting and easy project to promote because it ran on green, ran on hydroelectricity. I got a lot of PR for that company without trying very. And I enjoyed that role, and I did that for 3 years with those guys. And then as companies get bigger, they become more political and they take on more people. And that's the bit then when I start losing interest, because I like to be involved when there's only 3 or 4 people and there's no politics. So we had a little bit of a, we didn't follow. We just went our separate ways, and I went to work for a company in Luxembourg called Lux Connect. Another really interesting company because Lux Connect had 4 tier 4 certified data centers in Luxembourg, and they were owned by the Luxembourg government. And so they wanted me to help them promote Luxembourg as a data center destination, and also to promote the Lux Connect brand. And that was very interesting because the Luxembourg government were very, very helpful because they own the data centers. so even the Prime Minister was very, very helpful in helping us promote the data centers. And we used to have receptions in the Luxembourg embassy in London where we would invite people along, interested parties, and we would take tours out to Luxembourg and all that sort of thing. And it just made me realize how helpful it is when the government is actually promoting with you.
Right.
Which they hadn't done in Norway, because in Norway at the time when I was working there, they didn't see the need for data centers because they had all the revenue they needed from oil.
From oil, of course, yes.
That subsequently changed because the data centers became more important as the oil price fell in Norway. They realized that they're reliant on one industry and one alone, and so they decided, oh yes, we need to get into data centers as well.
Right.
But that was long after I left. So that was very interesting, the Lux Connect thing, and I did that for 3 years as well. And then a year and a half ago, I met these guys from Sweden who had been planning to build a data center that was climate positive. In other words, it gave more to the climate than it took away.
Okay.
And they've been planning it for 3 or 4 years. I'd met them quite a while ago, and now they got the thing off the ground about 18 months ago. They'd actually built it. and I went to see them, and I went to see the data center, and it was a really interesting project because the plan is to use the waste heat to from the local town, or help heat the local town, which was oil-fired heating, and also to provide drying for a wood chip plant, which was next door to the data center, and then the waste energy would be used to dry the wood chips as they're being processed, to turn it into wood to be used in fires. So that was good. A very interesting thing about that data center is it's made of wood, and I wrote an article called "Would You Believe It?" about the fact that this data center is made of wood.
Yeah.
Now,
is that safe?
I thought I'd get a lot of negative feedback from this article, but if you ever get a chance to read the article, it was in Data Economy, I think, called "Would You Believe It?" And basically, this wood that they use, it's very, very highly compressed, and so it does not catch fire. What it does is it creates a carbon layer around the outside of it, which protects the inside from fire. And it's actually structurally safer than steel and concrete, because when it gets hot, it doesn't distort as concrete does and steel does. So and they use it, you know, they use it in airport lounges, and they use it in other buildings. So it's a well accepted, and they've actually used it in hotels now, 5-story, 10-story hotels. So it's an accepted, though counterintuitive form of construction. So that was interesting. So I'm still working with those guys, helping them promote Sweden as a data center destination and helping them promote Eco Data Center. They've since taken over another data center in the north of Sweden called Fort Lax, and one of their clients is BMW. So that's been good PR for that company. And they're continuing to expand and acquire other data centers. I think that's their plan. The other things I do are, I'm very enthusiastic about immersion cooling. I think immersion cooling is going to have a huge impact on the data center industry. And so I'm going to promote a thing called immersion cooling, where they have tanks of non-conductive liquid, and you can just drop the server straight into the liquid. And I think the advantages of it are so phenomenal compared to air cooled. It's quiet, it takes up less space, it takes up less energy. It doesn't need a data center environment. You can put it anywhere. Yeah. It's like a chest freezer. You can just put it anywhere with this power and cooling. So I think it's going to have a huge impact on the data center industry, but that might take some time.
Yeah. Believe it or not, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, carry on, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to actually comment to that. It's kind of interesting because, believe it or not, just a few months ago, I actually toured a facility that was an immersion cooling facility here in Texas, where I am, in the city of Houston. And I saw everything that you're describing sort of firsthand, the amount or how much smaller the rooms have to be as far as just the server rooms. They don't have to be near the size of the normal air-cooled server rooms, and just how much simpler the whole infrastructure is. So saw what you're talking about. It's definitely a very interesting thought, very interesting idea. And I think it will take some time, like you said, but it is a very interesting thought, I think.
Well, it's very counterintuitive, isn't it? You know, there's a photograph of me on my website, my Total Data Center Solutions website, where I'm putting my hand in the liquid, you know, and it looks wrong, you know. You see all this electricity flowing around it. And of course, you could, you know, we're in a very risk-averse industry. You see, you can imagine some facilities guy or some CIO, and he buys this immersion cooling solution. And then he finds up, then he has a problem, and he has to go and see the board, and he has to say, why did you stick all our servers in this liquid? And then he's lost his job, you know.
Right.
So it's very counterintuitive, and the industry is very, you know, risk averse, understandably, because people's jobs are on the line, and also there's far more consequences if for any reason the data center fails.
Right.
And for the same reason, I got involved in another project where we are supplying very, very large multi-megawatt lithium-ion batteries to companies in the data centers in the UK where you plug this battery into the data center input, and it basically runs the data center for 2 or 3 hours when electricity is very expensive. And the savings you make from that are about 10 to 15% of the electricity bill. And so this company that approached me and asked me to market this, basically they don't charge for these batteries, even though they cost £500,000 a megawatt. They don't charge for them. They give them away for free, and they maintain them and install them. And the contract is that you sign the contract for 10 years and then you split the savings. And so you can see that, you know, that it's, in theory, that's a no-brainer. You go to a co-location data center company and you say, would you like to have a free battery? And a lot of them are very interested, but until we get the first ones installed, which we are doing at the moment to prove the concept, we're at a bit of a logjam in terms of getting them up and running. But we do have quite a pipeline of interested parties now. And once the first 2 or 3 are working and people can talk to the people who've got them installed, I think that will be a big thing. The other advantage to that is that in the UK especially, the electricity grid is very up and down at the moment, the frequency, because it's a lot of the electricity is generated by solar and by wind, and it's causing a lot of fluctuation in the frequency. So they need batteries in the grid to help stabilize it. So that's going to be a big thing of the future as well. And also microgrid, as well as putting the batteries in, we'll put in you know, solar panels and wind turbines, which charge the batteries during the day, and that becomes kind of a microgrid then as well, which is a trendy thing at the moment, a fashionable term.
Yeah. Who are some of the first? Do you have the freedom to share with us who some of the first data centers that are trying this lithium-ion battery option?
Well, as soon as I can, I will. As soon as I, you know, I'm going to do a big press release. It's smaller companies at the moment, because obviously we have to take one step at a time. The big boys are interested, but once they've seen the proof of concept, I'm sure we'll get them all to sign up, because at the end of the day, it's a competitive industry, a co-location data center industry, and everyone is looking for an advantage. And you can either pass the saving on to your client, your percentage on to your client, or you can retain it and make slightly more profit. Either way, it's going to benefit the co-location data center owner and his client. So I think once 1 or 2 have installed them, the others will have to follow quickly. That's
it's a very interesting thought. No, it's a very interesting thought. So this year, I want to make a little transition here. This year, you also recognize as one of the top 50 marketeers in the world, the CMO50. Congratulations on that. When did you learn about this?
Well, a friend of mine nominated me. He was Noel actually from Citadel, and I didn't know about it. And then I think it just came up as a post on LinkedIn, and I looked at it. And my name was there. I thought, I'm happy. You know, because I'm not really trained in marketing, and I'm not even trained in sales. I'm not trained in marketing. So I think as a result of that, my approach has been slightly different to a trained marketing executive. For example, you know, like I tried to raise a persona for myself on LinkedIn, which is a little bit unusual. So last Sunday, I posted a photograph of a speedboat a classic speedboat I'm restoring. But I'm changing it from a petrol engine to an electric engine, and it had 2,500 views and about 100 likes.
Wow!
All it was a photograph of front of a speedboat saying, "This is going to be changed from, you know, this is a green speedboat and a classic 1950 speedboat that I'm converting from petrol to electric," and so it's just trying to give yourself a little bit of individuality, you know. Because I'm passionate about boats still. I'm sitting on my electric barge at the moment, which I designed and built about 10 years ago. And so it's nice to be a little bit unusual in what you do, you know. So this electric barge works off 4 electric thrusters. It hasn't got a rudder on it. It just works off a joystick. So this was a pretty revolutionary design when I did it, and so I use it as my office because it's next door to my house.
Oh wow.
So,
So
so yeah,
what, are you on the river on Thames? Is that what you're on? Or are you on?
I'm on the canal
Okay.
in the middle of the country actually.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
and there's a canal system runs throughout the UK, which I'm not sure you're aware of, but this particular piece of canal joins a very large river, the River Severn, to the industrial heartlands in Birmingham, and it was
Wow.
built in 1790s to 1800s to transport manufactured goods from the heartland of the UK
Right.
down the River Severn, and then from the River Severn down to Bristol, and from Bristol to the rest of the world. So
Right.
this boat is on this canal system at the moment, but I can take it down onto the river if I want to.
Wow.
So, yeah,
Okay.
so that's that's my
Did you
office.
build it?
Well, I got people to build a steel shell for me, and then
Right.
I got some help with carpenters and things, and I fitted it out myself. So I
Wow.
find that quite relaxing. As
Yeah,
an
that's
artist.
very interesting. I can honestly say I've never interviewed anyone from a barge yet. So that's again, like I said, what the introduction that I mentioned, multifaceted. That's very interesting. I was wondering about the background behind you. I kept looking back. So
Well, if you look
very,
down
very.
here, you'll see. I don't know if I can lift it. You can see there's 5 points down
Oh yeah.
there.
Uh-huh.
They're
Yeah.
remote control sailing boats, so I
Yeah.
use those
Beautiful.
to relax on the weekends.
Beautiful.
Sailing
Just
boats.
about a year and a half ago or so, my wife and I spent some time in the UK, and I remember coming up, driving on the road, and coming up to one of those canal crossings where the bridge all of a sudden came up, and one of those,
All right.
I assume it was an electric barge. I don't know, but I just remember a man standing outside of a small little barge, and he had all kinds of potted plants and everything,
Oh
sitting
yeah,
right
yeah.
there. So
That's a
clearly
narrow
living.
boat. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah,
So
he
anyway,
was on. This is a narrow boat. The narrow boat can only be 6'6" wide to get through the locks.
okay,
That's why it's
right,
quite narrow.
okay,
And that's the restriction of a narrow boat is the
okay,
width of it and the height of it and the depth of
right,
it. So it can only be 6'6" wide, and the depth can only be 3 foot. Otherwise, it gets stuck in the mud. But they're all they're all man-made. The canals are man-made, so
right,
they're not very deep, but they're just deep
right.
enough to run a barge over them.
And it's interesting because it seems like there is sort of a resurgence, I guess, of the electric boats in the UK right now. I know in one of your posts you mentioned, and I kind of looked it up a little bit, but back in the 1800s, electric boats were quite popular, even on the River
That's
Thames
right.
there.
Yeah.
And
It's quite
there was even
extraordinary.
there was even a 60, I think one of the biggest boats that was running, I was looking up, was a 65-foot boat. There was an 80 passenger boat running on electric. Why do you think that sort of ended at that time, early 1900s?
I think, to be honest, they were electric cars as well in about 1900, and I think somehow the gasoline guys just shut them down, because the electric boats on the Thames, there were charging stations for them and everything.
Oh,
And there
really?
were a lot of them in the 1890s, the 1900s, and it's a much more civilized way to travel on the river than have a petrol or diesel engine, because it's silent,
Mm-hmm.
So when I've got my little electric speedboat going, we'll do a virtual trip on it, if you like, and you can film it.
Oh, that sounds great. I would love that.
That will take another couple of months. I've just had the motor delivered this morning for it, so I've got to
okay.
install that and get the batteries for it and wire them all up, and away we go.
Wow, I'm telling you. When you post that information up on LinkedIn, that's going to be another 5,000 views. I can imagine. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much. I know I've taken quite a bit of your time already. I have lots of other questions, but really do appreciate your time and your experience and your wisdom. It's interesting what you mentioned, and even some of the things that you mentioned about how some of us, we don't grow up thinking, when I grow up, I'm going to be a data center man. It's some of these things we just kind of fall into. And some of the individuals you mentioned, you talked about Frantic, who is not struggling to raise funds today with a $1 billion check that he recently got for starting another co-location company. So it's just interesting, the things that you've talked about and the things that I've learned out of our short conversation. I do appreciate your time. I do appreciate you letting us pick from your very rich experience. I wish you all the best, and I
Thank
am
you very
looking
much.
forward to you to taking you up on that virtual tour on your new electric boat.
Okay, no problem at all. Enjoy talking to you.
All right, thanks so much, Jonathan.